Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well because today we're talking about music and today we are introducing Journey to Jazz Fusion Part 1. Now, what is Journey to Jazz Fusion? Well, every year I usually pick a band that I know a little bit about, I've heard some of the hits or I want to get more into their catalog. And I dive right in, I'll pick up some albums, stream the rest that I can't find, just get into it, learn about the band, so on and so forth. I've done that with, Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and Def Leppard. I did that recently with Bare Naked Ladies. And this year I thought, well, let's do the same thing, but with a genre. I'm already a big fan of prog rock. A lot of people that watch my channel know that. And I found more and more, I've been listening to more Canterbury as well as Krautrock. And part of what's appealing about that is a lot of aspects, but one of them is the more jazz influence that music has. So I thought, well, why not, as I'm getting more into jazz in general via, cool jazz with the likes of Bill Evans, why don't I kind of delve into jazz fusion? So that's a massive genre. Jazz itself, big. Prog itself, big. Jazz fusion, more concentrated in a way, but bigger in a way. So it's like, how do you do that? So I picked up a few, not, the first albums, because quite often with a genre, you can get into semantics about, what truly is the first XYZ album or whatever. But I picked up some of the early kind of cornerstones of the genre as a way to sort of figure it out. Where do I want to go from here? What more do I want to get into? And I realized we're only talking about 3 albums today, hence part 1. And it's kind of like a choose your own. You're going to help me along the way. You're going to kind of guide me. Where should I go from here? What else should I get into? And I do already have some other records lined up, some from artists we're going to talk about today, some from, musicians we're going to talk about today, but other artists I might have never have heard of and want to get more into. So with that, I've got 3 albums today, and we're going to start in 1969. Again, not necessarily according to the internet, which, is always a very balanced source of information to find, but a great year for that. So not the first year for jazz fusion, but kind of one of the foundational years. We're going to start with In a Silent Way by Miles Davis. There we go. This is a 2019 reissue that came out. It sounds great. Came out on Columbia. Yeah, just Columbia Sony Music. So what do you got on here? You got 2 tracks, each track being a sideline, or I guess 4. Two, 4. So you got Miles Davis in a Silent Way. Side 1, you have Shh, and then Peaceful. Side 2, you have the title track In a Silent Way, and then It's About That Time. So like I said, released in 1969, July 30th on Columbia, produced by Tio Macero. I hope that's how you pronounce the name. It was recorded in 1 session date, February 18th, 1969, at CBS 30th Street Studio in New York City. This is one day of recording produced this. Amazing. So the producer Macero edited and kind of arranged the recordings. And I know, especially among jazz purists at the time, that was the big outrage as well. Not just the type of music presented on here, but the idea of kind of editing and snipping and trimming different cuts and elements to produce something that sounds organic, but maybe is being represented differently. For a lot of people, this marks the beginning of Davis's electronic period. So I know obviously some bigger albums come right down the pipe, but I figured I'd start at the start, at least for Davis in this aspect. It's also, he gets a little more into modal jazz as well. So those kind of are taken together, but they sort of go off in different directions, but they sort of are the same thing at this period in time. So it's kind of a stylistic shift away from something that can easily be replicated live into a more studio-oriented music as well. So who is playing on here? A lot of names I've heard before, seen before, and we're going to see together again on this journey. So we have Miles Davis on trumpet, Wayne Shorter on soprano sax, John McLaughlin on electric guitar, Chick Corea on electronic piano, Herbie Hancock on electric piano, Joe Zawinul. Now these are some names I'm not as familiar with now that we're down here. Joe Zawinul on electric piano and organ, Dave Holland on double bass, and Tony Williams on drums. Apologies, that's just one name I'm not familiar with. Heard of or a lot of some of these other names. this is one of those records where when you describe it, you just start talking about opposites, like it's delicate and heavy, it's gentle but a canon, and that you could say that a lot for a lot of Davis's work, but I think it's very fitting on here in the way that it sounds like it shouldn't work, but it does. It doesn't sound like music, and can't even really describe it. It doesn't sound like music. It sounds like um, the music being the glass, right? So usually you have, if you think of like pouring water into a glass, I like this analogy a lot for a lot of different aspects. You have your, the genre, as it were, is your glass. And that kind of defines what something may or may not sound like. It gives you an idea of the structure. And then the specific band, the musicianship, the recording techniques, the melodies, all that stuff is the water or the liquid that you pour into it. Um, this sounds like it's almost the inverse. You're using a lot of different electronic instrumentation and kind of motifs as the liquid, and you're just pouring it into space and you're seeing where it's going to go. You're just pouring it on the table. You're just letting the musicians kind of take rock instrumentation and jazz instrumentation and letting it go all over the place. And it sounds really, really cool. It meanders, but it never feels boring to me. In general, I think that the only time this suffers is that the two tracks do sound very similar. So when you're listening to it on vinyl, it's kind of like, well, this track isn't that different. So for me, to actually give both tracks a fair shake, I kind of, some listenings I would start on side one, some I would start on side two. And I think generally I like actually the first track more, the Peaceful. And I think that's just because that's quite often the one I hear first. But both pieces are absolutely brilliant. The playing of all the musicians, it's great. I think later I'm going to talk about some albums where it's more sort of band focused, and sometimes people take a step back to let other people take center stage or take the focus. It's really weird on here. It sounds like everyone has the focus at the same time, which shouldn't work. You can't have everyone soloing at the same time. And that's sort of what it sounds like on here, but it does work. And that just goes to show how amazing all of these musicians are, that they can all stand out while they're all trying to stand out. None of them are trying to take that supportive role, but then they are at the same time, which is amazing. So starting with In a Silent Way by Miles Davis, what a cool way to start that journey. Next up, also released in 1969, October of 1969, is one that I've heard before, but now kind of under a new critical lens, I suppose, which is Hot Rats by Frank Zappa. I believe this is from 94 on Roscope. I think this edition here, 95 this edition. This is the second solo album from Frank Zappa, so it's no longer the Mothers. It was the first recorded project after kind of the original version of the Mothers of Invention sort of went away, and that's largely due to the music in Frank Zappa's head. The band just couldn't keep up. They did some great music, but he had bigger ideas, which I think are coming to fruition on this. And even in terms of Frank Zappa's jazz fusion output, I think a bit later in the 70s, you're going to see, in my opinion, some stronger albums. There's some really great tracks on here, but some that don't stand out quite as much for me. It's still a great album though. You get 6 songs. Five of them are instrumental. One, Willie the Pimp, does have vocals involved from Captain Beefheart, which is pretty cool. Zappa dedicated the album to his newborn son, Dweezil Zappa, who you might be seeing that name around, just recently remastered the Deep Purple Machine Head Super Deluxe box or whatever it is. He even won a Grammy for the Best Rock Instrumental Performance. Dweezil did on Zappa Plays Zappa for Peaches and Regalia. Now, this one is very different from that Miles Davis album we just talked about. It feels almost like blues fusion. I actually think it's an album that gets stronger the more it goes on. Peaches and Regalia, that's a fun song. I don't seem to be quite as enamored with it as a lot of folks do. Willie the Pimp doesn't really do much for me. It feels just like an extended blues rock jam, which is cool. But then compared to a lot of other jazz fusion I've been listening to, doesn't hit the mark as well. Um, I didn't write down who plays on this album. My bad. Primarily other folks, musicians. No, didn't write those down in the notes. Recorded on 16-track equipment. That's cool. My bad. Sorry for not writing down musicians. Son of Mr. Green Jeans is good for me. It's the last 3 tracks where this really picks up. Little Umbrellas, Gumbo Variations, and It Must Be a Camel. Especially Gumbo Variations. I really like that one. I feel like we get jazzier and jazzier as the album goes on, which is really, really fun because, again, for me, the album's, it's really different, but it definitely feels like a rock band fusing together with jazz. So we're not really getting that sort of philosophical approach that I definitely feel coming through with Miles Davis, where we're really pushing the limits of not just some genres, but of music. How do you contemplate creating music? Whereas this feels more like a band doing band stuff, bending genres, twisting things around, mixing things up, but a little bit different. And it's really cool. I really like this, but I do know for a fact that I enjoy a lot more of Zappa's later fusion stuff. But I think considering these both came out in 1969, that's amazing. Like they're so different and they're so forward thinking. And if you think about all the other music coming out that same year, that was just a year of musical explosiveness, which is amazing. And this certainly adds to that. Maybe it sounds like I'm not appreciating enough, but this is my second album on the journey to jazz fusion. And I think it served as like a really good segue into the third album, which is The Intermounting Flame by the Mahavishnu Orchestra with John McLaughlin, who we just talked about. This is an edition from 1998, which I really like. The booklet's a lot of fun, gives you a lot of background on the band. No bonus tracks or anything, I don't think. Yeah, no bonus tracks, but a really good booklet that I enjoyed reading about. So I did write down who's in the band for this one, probably because it was in the booklet. So John McLaughlin, who we actually heard prior playing on In a Silent Way, totally different on here on guitar. Rick Laird on bass, Billy Cobham on drums and percussion, Jan Hammer on, or maybe Jan, please correct me, on keyboards and organ, and Jerry Goodman on violin. And this is amazing. This blew me away. I think it feels like if you take the weird philosophical genre music bending that we have in A Silent Way, combine that with a lot of the very talented musicianship we hear on Hot Rats, you get this. And I mean, this is even stronger than that. I think it's weird. Like it feels like it shouldn't work, but it does. It feels like a jazz band playing rock and a rock band playing jazz. And that's what I think jazz fusion should be. It's emotional. It's so emotional, actually. Like it's all instrumental, but I mean, you go places on this album. It takes you somewhere. It's a trip. Meeting of the Spirits, what an opener. Like that tells you everything you need to know right away. It's not necessarily my favorite song on the album, but it serves as a great introduction of kind of like, oh, okay. Oh, this came out in 1971, by the way. So we're skipping over 1970. But I do know for a fact that, another kind of foundational jazz fusion record. And then the rest of the notes are just, yeah, my opinions. Fantastic album, 1971. Dawn dials it back a bit. And this is the first time on the album, and you hear it throughout the rest, where they are taking a bit more of that band structure, where some tracks are geared more towards not even specifically different moods, but highlighting different members of the band. I will say, actually, for me, the highlights are Billy Cobham on drums and percussion. I think throughout the entire album, he takes it away. That's not to say anyone else on here is a slouch, but I think they all get their moments to shine here and there, but throughout the entire album, I think the drumming is spectacular. Dawn is a nice, slower, emotional piece, and that gets into, for me, there's kind of 3 tracks that really stand out. This is the first one, Noonward Race. It feels exactly like that. It feels hot, and sweaty and kind of oppressive in how energetic it is. I really enjoy that one a lot. A Lotus on our streams is a lot of fun. And then for me, these two tracks go together hand in hand. And this was like, listening to it, it's like, I feel scared. Like I felt it. I had that like physical response before I started to pay attention to musically why that is. I was like, my body is in a fight or flight response right now. Like, what is it? How is this music doing that? It's the power of music though, right? But it's amazing. And that's why listening to new music, listening to new genres, that can kind of have that. So track 5, Vital Transformation, into track 6, The Dance of Maya. Perfection. I mean, if you're going to listen to this album, start from the beginning. It's sequenced perfectly. I wouldn't jump right into there, but these are by far my two kind of favorite tracks on the album. I feel like they go together really well. Fantastic, fantastic. And then you close out with You Know, and Awakening. Awakening especially is a beautiful closer to this album. And it's one of those, this album especially, the other two, it's like I appreciate and I see why they're important. And I definitely want to listen to more Davis. I have a lot of his earlier works, but now I kind of want to go further into his electronic period. And Frank Zappa, I also have more Zappa albums, but it's, again, all of these artists have massive discographies that, unless you're being very pointed how you pick them up, like Davis, I just kind of pick up on vinyl when I see it on a good deal. So I only have 2 other albums. Zappa, I have, I think, 5 other albums, but again, some of the earlier ones, a couple of the later ones, some live stuff scattered all around. But this is, where I started with Mahavishnu, and I really want to keep going with that. And it's just a great journey. I'm really excited to kind of continue on this, because this album especially, The Inner Mounting Flame, you feel that. That's a perfect title, perfect album cover. Can't say enough good things about it. And those are the 3 records that I'm starting my journey to jazz fusion on. I've already got a few more lined up, but I kind of want to hear from you on this. Where do I go next? What's going to sell me more? Well, Frank Zappa, I'm well aware, maybe I didn't speak incredibly highly, although that sounds weird, but just compared to the other 2, I didn't enjoy it as much. But Miles Davis, where do I go next? Do I just continue, that electronic path, or do I jump around? Maybe there's a really cool compilation. And then same thing with Mahavishnu, I've got some other stuff lined up. I've got, some of these solo musicians on vinyl. I've got Return to Forever lined up. I've got Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock. I've even got some like jazz fusion stuff that I don't see talked about a lot in the vinyl community. I've got some Weather Report for more Wayne Shorter stuff. Where do I go? It's a big old weird world of jazz fusion out there, and this is my dipping of the toes, dipping the toes in. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.